At my daughter's 10th birthday party, I found her custom cake smashed in the kitchen trash can. My sister laughed and said my child was not worth wasting calories on. I picked up my daughter and left without a word. The very next morning, my mother called me sobbing, begging me to call the venue because they were canceling my sister's $100,000 wedding. I simply said, I honestly do not care, and hung up the phone. My mother started screaming, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the secret owner of the luxury estate they had booked, and her precious future son-in-law had just committed federal identity fraud. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. Growing up in an affluent suburb of Atlanta, Image was absolutely everything to my mother, Mama Valerie. She was the president of the church welcoming committee, the head of the neighborhood watch, and a woman who believed that keeping up appearances was next to godliness. In her eyes, my younger sister Chloe was the perfect accessory to her carefully curated life. Chloe was 28, obsessed with social media, and engaged to a man who checked all of my mother's superficial status boxes. His name was Brandon. He was a white man who boasted constantly about his family's old money roots in Boston. My mother treated him like absolute royalty, convinced that this marriage would elevate our family's social standing to untouchable heights within the community. I, on the other hand, was the 32-year-old single mother who supposedly worked a basic public relations job. I was the cautionary tale, the daughter my mother prayed for out loud at Sunday service. She had no idea that my quiet PR firm was actually the front for a massive commercial real estate and luxury event management corporation that I had built entirely from the ground up. I preferred to keep my wealth hidden, knowing exactly how my family would try to exploit it if they knew the truth about my success. It was a brisk Saturday afternoon when I drove my 10-year-old daughter Zuri to my mother's house. It was Zuri's birthday, and my mother had insisted on hosting a small family dinner to celebrate. I had been extremely hesitant. My mother had a long, painful history of making my daughter an afterthought, but Zuri had begged to see her grandmother and her Aunt Chloe. I wanted to make the day perfect for her. Since Zuri was fascinated by space and science, I had spent over $300 on a custom multi-tiered galaxy cake from the most exclusive bakery in the city. It took me weeks to secure the order. I carefully carried the heavy cake box up the manicured front walkway, while Zuri skipped ahead of me, her face glowing with pure anticipation. When we walked through the heavy oak front doors, there were no balloons. There was no happy birthday banner. The house smelled of expensive catering and lavender diffusers, not a child's birthday party. Zuri ran straight toward the formal dining room, eager to see her birthday setup. I followed close behind, but the moment I stepped into the room, my blood ran ice cold. Zuri was standing completely still, staring down at the large kitchen trash can that had been pulled out and positioned near the swinging doors. My stomach plummeted. I walked over and looked inside. There, smashed upside down among coffee grounds and discarded food wrappers, was Zuri's beautiful galaxy cake. The dark blue and purple frosting was heavily smeared against the plastic liner. The delicate little fondant planets I had special ordered were crushed and broken beyond recognition. Before I could even process the shock, I heard the distinct clink of silverware. I looked up. Standing at the head of the long mahogany dining table was Brandon. He was wearing a crisp pastel polo shirt and expensive boat shoes, looking every bit the entitled country club stereotype he desperately tried to project. He held a silver cake knife in his right hand. Placed right in the center of the table, exactly where Zuri's birthday cake was supposed to be, sat a massive, ostentatious three-tiered white wedding cake covered in sugar flowers. My mother, Mama Valerie, was seated at the table, a crystal glass of sparkling water in her hand, pointedly avoiding my gaze. Brandon looked up, completely unbothered by the heavy tears welling in my 10-year-old daughter's eyes. "Oh, Nia," he said, his tone dripping with thick condescension. "You are here. Good." I stared at him, my hands shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. "What happened to my daughter's cake?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. Brandon sighed casually, swirling the wine in a glass sitting next to him. Look, Chloe told me you bought Zuri's cake from some cheap grocery store. I did not want that synthetic sugar trash ruining my future mother-in-law's palate right before we taste our actual expensive wedding cake. You understand, right? Those of us from old money backgrounds are just highly sensitive to cheap things. We have a refined standard to maintain. I stood frozen, my mind racing. A cheap grocery store cake? I had paid hundreds of dollars for a custom creation to make my fatherless daughter feel like the center of the universe on her special day. And this arrogant man, a guest in my family's home, had literally thrown her joy into the garbage so he could have a wedding cake tasting on her birthday. Zuri grabbed my hand, her small fingers trembling violently. She looked up at me, a single tear spilling over her eyelashes, and whispered that she wanted to go home. It broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I looked at Mama Valerie, waiting for her to intervene, waiting for the matriarch of our family to stand up for her own flesh-and-blood granddaughter. Instead, my mother smoothed the front of her expensive silk blouse and offered a dismissive wave of her hand. "Nia, please do not make a scene today," my mother said, her voice laced with heavy irritation. "Brandon and Chloe have a very tight schedule, and this wedding is the most important event this family has ever seen. Zuri is just a child. She does not need all that sugar anyway. You can take her to get some ice cream later. We have to focus on the wedding right now. Do not be so incredibly selfish." Brandon smirked, cutting a delicate slice of the white vanilla sponge and sliding it onto a gold-rimmed china plate. He slid it toward my mother. "Try this one, Valerie. It has a champagne infusion. Much better than that blue monstrosity that was taking up space on the table." He turned his attention back to me, leaning casually against the high back of his chair. "Really, Nia, you should be thanking me. Exposing a child to that level of low-class presentation sets a terribly bad precedent. Chloe and I are trying to elevate the standards around here. When we get married at the Sterling estate next month, we need everyone in this family, including you, to understand exactly how luxury works. We cannot have you embarrassing us in front of my Boston relatives." I looked at this man, an outsider who had somehow convinced my mother that his pale skin and exaggerated tales of generational wealth made him superior to her own family. He was standing in my mother's dining room, dictating what was acceptable, throwing away my hard-earned money, and breaking my daughter's heart without a single second thought. The sheer audacity of his white privilege wrapped up in fake old money superiority was absolutely sickening. But what disgusted me even more was my mother's eager complicity. She was so desperate for proximity to his supposed elite status that she was willing to sit back and watch her own 10-year-old granddaughter cry on her birthday. Before I could even formulate a response to my mother's unbelievable betrayal, my sister Chloe finally looked up from her smartphone. She let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. "Honestly, Nia, you are always playing the victim," Chloe said, her voice dripping with extreme irritation. "A 10th birthday is not a milestone, it is just another Tuesday. Next month, I am marrying Brandon. His family is flying in from Massachusetts, and we are hosting the reception at the Sterling estate. It is a $100,000 event. I know, as a single mother working a basic desk job, you do not understand how high society works. But Zuri is going to have to learn that she is not the center of the universe. She is used to not having a father around, so she can get used to not having a cake." The sheer cruelty of her words hung heavily in the dining room. I looked at my sister, taking in her perfectly styled hair and the smug expression on her face. She was the golden child, the one my mother always shielded from consequence. Now she was using my daughter's pain as a stepping stone to elevate her own pathetic ego. Brandon chuckled, wrapping his arm around Chloe's waist and pulling her close. He looked at me as if I were something foul he had scraped off his expensive boat shoes. "Chloe is right," Brandon chimed in, pointing the silver cake knife in my direction. "You should be using this as a teaching moment. In the real world, the people with money and influence make the rules. We are trying to pull this family out of the mud and give you all a respectable name. You acting like a hysterical single mother over a piece of trash cake is exactly why my relatives are hesitant to even attend this wedding in the first place. I turned my gaze back to Mama Valerie. This was the woman who stood at the pulpit every Sunday morning preaching about family values and the grace of God. This was the woman who had demanded I bring my daughter over today because family is everything. She sat there carefully smoothing the fabric of her expensive silk skirt, refusing to meet my eyes. She had heard a grown man disrespect her daughter and a grown woman verbally abuse her granddaughter, and she actively chose to protect her own proximity to Brandon's fake wealth. I did not scream. I did not flip the heavy mahogany table even though every single instinct in my body demanded that I tear the room apart. Screaming would only give them the reaction they desperately wanted. It would allow them to paint me as the angry, unhinged sister who ruined the elegant wedding tasting. Instead, I let a terrifying absolute calm wash over my entire body. I turned my back on the three of them and dropped down to one knee, so I was directly at eye level with my daughter. Zuri was trying so hard to be brave, but her bottom lip was quivering uncontrollably. I pulled a soft tissue from my purse and gently wiped the single tear from her cheek. I gave her my most reassuring smile, the one I reserved strictly for the two of us when the world felt too heavy. "You listen to me," I whispered softly to her. "You are the absolute center of my universe. Your birthday is the most important day of the year, and no one in this room is worthy of celebrating you. We are going to leave right now and have the best night ever. Do you understand?" Zuri gave a small, brave nod and wiped her eyes. I stood up, taking her small hand in mine. My grip was firm and protective. I turned back and looked directly at Mama Valerie. The silence in the room was suffocating. My mother finally shifted in her chair, a flicker of nervous energy breaking through her rigid posture. She opened her mouth, likely to offer another church-infused excuse about needing to be flexible and forgiving for the sake of the family image. I did not let her speak a single word. "Today you watched this man throw your granddaughter's joy into the garbage," I said, my voice eerily steady and devoid of any emotion. "You watched Chloe tear down a 10-year-old child. You chose them. You chose this fake display of wealth over your own blood. Do not ever call my phone again." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the formal dining room, keeping Zuri safely tucked by my side. As we reached the front hallway, the paralyzing shock finally wore off my mother. I heard her dining chair scrape violently against the hardwood floor. "Nia Caldwell, you get back here right now!" Mama Valerie screamed from the dining room, her footsteps hurrying toward the hallway. "Do not you dare walk away from me when I am speaking. You are disrespecting this family. You are going to ruin your sister's mood, and I will not have it. You need to apologize to Brandon for your attitude immediately." I ignored her screaming completely. I pushed open the heavy oak front door and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, letting the door slam shut behind us with a resounding thud. I strapped Zuri into the back seat of my modest sedan, making sure she was comfortable. When I slid into the driver's seat, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My phone was already buzzing endlessly in my purse. It was my mother undoubtedly calling to hurl more insults and demand my total submission. I pressed the ignore button and put the car in drive. I drove us straight to the most exclusive luxury entertainment complex in downtown Atlanta. It was a place where membership cost thousands of dollars a year, a place I had unlimited access to through my corporate real estate holdings, but never bragged about. I bypassed the crowded main entrance and went straight to the private concierge desk. Within 10 minutes, I had rented out an entire VIP bowling and arcade suite just for the two of us. I ordered a massive dessert platter featuring gourmet cupcakes, warm chocolate fondue, and a towering display of artisanal ice cream that cost 3 times as much as the ruined Galaxy cake. For the next 4 hours, I focused entirely on my daughter. We played every single arcade game, laughed until our stomachs physically hurt, and completely turned the terrible day around. Watching her vibrant smile return was the only thing that mattered to me in that moment. But while I celebrated with Zuri and made sure she felt like a princess, a cold and calculated plan was already taking deep root in the back of my mind. My family thought I was a nobody. Brandon thought his pale skin and exaggerated tales of old money gave him the ultimate right to step on a black child without facing any repercussions. Chloe thought her $100,000 wedding at the Sterling estate made her completely untouchable. They had no idea that I held the keys to their entire future. I owned the Sterling estate. The very ground they planned to walk on belonged to the single mother they had just humiliated. I smiled as I watched Zuri win a massive stuffed bear at the arcade. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. I pulled up the digital contract file on my secured corporate server. The Sterling estate required a strict 20% deposit to hold the date, with the remainder financed or paid in full 30 days prior. According to the digital logs, the initial transaction attempted with Brandon's supposedly limitless platinum credit card had bounced hard due to insufficient funds. A few days later, an expedited financing application was submitted and approved to cover the entire $100,000 cost of the wedding. I zoomed in on the applicant information. The name on the digital signature line was Naya Caldwell. The social security number matched mine perfectly. My own mother, the woman who constantly berated my career and lifestyle, had handed over my highly guarded personal information to a man she barely knew just to finance a wedding they could not afford. I locked my tablet and set it on the marble counter. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I walked into my walk-in closet and bypassed the conservative clothes I usually wore around my family to play the part of the struggling single mother. Today required armor. I slipped into a tailored charcoal pantsuit that cost more than my mother's entire living room furniture, paired it with sharp designer stilettos, and grabbed my car keys. I was going to watch this beautiful disaster unfold in person. When I pulled into my mother's driveway, I could already hear the screaming from the sidewalk. The heavy oak front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into the foyer. The scene in the living room was absolute unfiltered chaos. Brandon was pacing violently across the expensive Persian rug, his face flushed an angry shade of red. He viciously kicked one of my mother's antique side tables, sending a priceless vase crashing into the wall. Chloe was curled up on the velvet sofa, sobbing uncontrollably into a throw pillow, her silk robe slipping off her shoulders. Mama Valerie was hovering near the fireplace, clutching a silver cross necklace and murmuring anxious prayers. My mother spotted me standing in the entryway and immediately lunged forward. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my fabric. She demanded that I get on my phone this exact second. She screamed that I needed to use whatever low-level public relations contacts I had to reach the owners of the Sterling estate and beg for their mercy. Brandon stopped pacing and glared at me. He snatched a thick stack of printed papers from the coffee table and marched over aggressively, shoving the documents against my chest. "Fix this right now," Brandon ordered, his voice echoing with arrogant authority. "Your incompetent industry contacts messed up a simple transaction. You call them and tell them that if my venue is not secured by noon, I will have my family's legal team sue them into absolute poverty." I did not flinch. I slowly took the papers from his hands, acting as though this was the first time I was seeing them. I flipped past the cancellation notice and deliberately stopped on the financing agreement. I looked at the bottom of the page, tracing the forged digital signature with my manicured finger. Then I looked up, locking eyes with the man who had thrown my daughter's birthday cake in the trash just 24 hours earlier. "This financing agreement is entirely in my name," I said, making my voice sound appropriately shocked. "You used my social security number to take out a $100,000 loan for your wedding." Brandon rolled his eyes and let out an exasperated sigh, completely unbothered by the fact that I had just caught him committing a felony. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down his nose at me. "You should be honored to contribute to this family," he scoffed. "Chloe's card had a daily limit issue, and my trust fund distribution is temporarily delayed until the end of the fiscal quarter. Valerie gave me your information to push the paperwork through so we did not lose our date. You have a basic steady paycheck. Paying this bill is the only way you will ever prove yourself useful to our elevated lifestyle." I turned my head slowly toward my mother. "You gave him my social security number. You handed over my identity to a man who just disrespected your granddaughter." Mama Valerie stepped forward, her posture rigid with righteous indignation. The Lord teaches us to share our blessings, Nia. She pointed a trembling finger at me. You have a stable income, and you have no husband to support. Brandon has millions of dollars tied up in complicated offshore accounts that you could not possibly understand. If his Boston relatives find out the venue canceled because of a minor billing error, our family will be a laughingstock in the community. I will not lose my position at the church over this. You are going to sign the formal debt acknowledgement form right now. You owe this to your sister. Chloe lifted her tear-stained face from the pillow, glaring at me with raw hatred. Just sign the stupid paper, Nia. Brandon's family is pure old money. They expect absolute perfection. You ruining my wedding day just because you are jealous of my happiness is exactly why you are going to end up alone. I looked at the three of them. A delusional mother, a spoiled sister, and a fraud of a man wrapped in pastel clothing. A deep, chilling laugh bubbled up from my chest. It started small, then echoed through the grand living room, silencing Chloe's dramatic sobs. You think this is funny? Brandon snarled, taking a threatening step toward me. I think it is absolutely hilarious, I replied, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You used my personal identification to secure a six-figure loan without my explicit consent. That is not a family favor, Brandon. That is federal identity theft. It carries a mandatory prison sentence. And what is even more amusing is the lie you just told my mother to justify it. I tossed the contract back onto the coffee table and pulled a thick manila folder from my designer bag. I looked directly into Brandon's pale, panicked eyes. The credit card that was declined by the Sterling estate did not belong to Chloe. It belonged to you. And it did not bounce because of a daily limit issue. It bounced because you are completely broke. The room went deathly quiet. Brandon's smug posture shattered instantly. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very small. He opened his mouth, stammering for a second before his arrogance kicked back in as a defense mechanism. He puffed out his chest, stepping toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. You have absolutely no idea how generational wealth is structured, Brandon sneered, trying to sound authoritative. My assets are tied up in corporate trusts and offshore holdings. People like you, people who live paycheck to paycheck, simply do not comprehend how liquidity works at my financial tier. I did not even blink. I unclasped the manila folder and let a thick stack of official court documents slide onto the coffee table right next to the fraudulent loan agreement. People like me know how to read a public bankruptcy filing, I said, my voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. Your family lost their Boston estate 5 years ago. Your father's investment firm was liquidated to pay off millions in secured debts. The luxury car parked in my mother's driveway is a short-term lease currently 3 months past due. You do not have offshore accounts, Brandon. You have a negative bank balance and a collection agency hunting you down for unpaid country club dues. Chloe stared at the documents, her eyes wide with panic. She reached out with a trembling hand, picking up the top page that clearly displayed the federal bankruptcy seal. She read the first few lines and gasped, dropping the paper as if it had burned her skin. Brandon, what is she talking about? Chloe asked, her voice cracking. Tell me she is lying. Tell me your family is transferring the funds for our house in the Hamptons. Brandon glared at her, his charming facade completely dissolving into something vicious. Shut up, Chloe, he snapped. The harshness in his tone made my mother flinch. I told you my funds were temporarily restricted. It is a minor legal hurdle. He is a con artist, Chloe, I said, shaking my head at her absolute delusion. He targeted you because Mom has been parading around the church and every neighborhood association bragging about our supposed family wealth. He heard the rumors about a massive trust fund and saw an easy target. He is using you to secure loans he could never get approved for on his own. Chloe suddenly stood up, her face twisting from panic back into that familiar defensive arrogance. She crossed her arms, jutting her chin out at me. You are just jealous, Chloe yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You cannot stand the fact that a man from a high society background chose me over a miserable single mother like you. Brandon does not need your money or your stupid credit checks. Mom already promised us $500,000 from the family trust fund to start his new venture right after our honeymoon. We do not need anything from you. I froze. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I turned my head slowly toward Mama Valerie. My mother had retreated toward the fireplace, her hands gripping the edge of the mantel so tightly her knuckles were stark white. She refused to look at me. Her eyes were fixed firmly on the floor. "What trust fund?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. My father had passed away, leaving nothing but a stack of medical bills and a modest life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral. There was no secret family fortune. The only asset of any real value in our entire bloodline was Big Mama's house. Big Mama was my grandmother. She was a fiercely proud black woman who scrubbed floors and took in laundry for 30 years to buy a beautiful, historic brick home in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood of Atlanta. She paid off every single cent of that mortgage with her own sweat and blood. When she passed, she left the house to my mother with one strict condition. It was never to be sold. It was meant to be our family's permanent sanctuary, a legacy of ownership passed down through generations. A horrifying realization struck me like a physical blow. The sudden influx of cash my mother had been flashing around. The designer bags, the expensive catering for the wedding tasting, the ability to casually promise $500,000 to a fraudulent white man. "Mom," I said, stepping toward her. "Look at me right now." Mama Valerie kept her eyes glued to the floor, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Do not tell me you took out a mortgage on Big Mama's house," I demanded, the anger boiling up in my throat. "Tell me you did not leverage our grandmother's legacy to feed this broke con artist." "I had to do it," Mama Valerie suddenly cried out, her head snapping up. Her face was defensive, heavily masked by her twisted sense of pride. "You do not understand how the world works, Nia. It is an investment. Brandon's connections in the Northeast are going to double that money once his new business launches. I am trying to elevate this family. I am trying to make sure Chloe never has to struggle the way I did. Big Mama would have wanted us to use that house to secure our place in society." "Big Mama would turn over in her grave," I shouted, finally letting my composure crack. "She scrubbed floors so we would always have a roof over our heads. She did not work herself to the bone so you could hand the deed over to a bank to impress a white man who throws your granddaughter's birthday cake in the trash. You risked our only family legacy for a lie." "It is not a lie!" Chloe screamed, stomping her foot like a petulant child. "Brandon is going to make us millions. You are just trying to ruin my wedding because you will never have one." Before I could respond to Chloe's absolute insanity, a sudden dark chuckle filled the room. Brandon was laughing. The panic had completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sinister, predatory gleam. He slowly walked around the coffee table, stepping directly into my personal space. He looked down at me, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "You think you have this all figured out, do you?" Brandon whispered, his tone dripping with malice. "You think you can just walk in here with your little folder of documents and play the hero? Let me remind you of one very important detail, Nia." He reached down and picked up the fraudulent wedding contract, tapping the digital signature line with his finger. "This $100,000 loan was successfully approved and processed under your name. The Social Security number verified. The digital footprint traced straight back to this very house. And who exactly handed me all of your highly confidential personal information?" Brandon turned his gaze toward my mother. Mama Valerie let out a sharp gasp, pressing her hand over her mouth. "That is right," Brandon continued, his eyes locking back onto mine. "Your dear mother voluntarily provided me with your Social Security number. She helped me bypass the security questions. She was a fully willing participant in securing this loan." He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "If you go to the police and report this as identity theft, the authorities will not just be looking at me. They will arrest your mother for conspiracy and federal fraud. She will be charged as an accessory to the crime. They will put handcuffs on the beloved president of the church welcoming committee and march her straight to a federal holding cell." Chloe gasped, running over to grab Brandon's arm. "You cannot let her do that to Mom, Brandon. Tell her she cannot do that. She will not." Brandon said, never breaking eye contact with me. He crossed his arms, utterly convinced he had just won the entire war. Because Nia is the responsible sister. She is the one who plays by the rules. Are you really going to send your own mother to a concrete prison cell over a piece of paper, Nia? Are you going to be the reason your mother wears a jumpsuit instead of her Sunday best? Brandon tossed the contract back onto the table, adjusting his collar with a smug sense of victory. Here's what is going to happen. You are going to sign the formal debt acknowledgement form. You are going to personally assume responsibility for the $100,000 venue cost. You are going to apologize to Chloe for causing all this unnecessary stress. If you do exactly as you are told, I will graciously allow you to keep quiet, and your mother gets to stay out of a federal penitentiary. Checkmate. He stood there waiting for me to break down. He expected me to cry, to beg to fold under the immense pressure of protecting my family from total destruction. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet single mother. Brandon walked over to the built-in wet bar in my mother's living room, pouring himself a generous glass of my mother's most expensive bourbon. The clinking of the ice cubes sounded unnaturally loud in the tense silence of the room. He took a slow, arrogant sip, leaning against the polished mahogany counter. He truly believed he had orchestrated the perfect trap. You should actually be thanking me, Nia Brandon said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His pastel shirt and perfectly styled hair made him look like a villain out of a cheap country club brochure. I am giving you a rare opportunity to be part of something bigger than your small, insignificant life. Let us be brutally honest for a second. What exactly were you going to use your pristine credit score for anyway? Another modest sedan. A slightly upgraded apartment in a mediocre neighborhood. You are a single mother working a basic desk job. Your financial ceiling is remarkably low. He pointed his glass at me, a condescending smirk plastered across his pale face. By taking on this venue debt, you are investing in Chloe's future. My family in Massachusetts is steeped in generational wealth. Once my offshore trusts clear probate and the liquidity frees up, we will pay you back. Probably. Or maybe you can just consider this your contribution to elevating this family's name. You see, when Chloe marries me, she steps into a different echelon of society. You paying this $100,000 bill is the only way you will ever prove yourself useful to our elevated lifestyle. I did not raise my voice. I did not move a single muscle. I just stared at this arrogant, mediocre man who had the absolute audacity to stand in a black woman's home and dictate her worth based on his fabricated pedigree. Chloe uncurled her legs from the velvet sofa, wiping her tear-stained face. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Brandon is right, Nia. She whined, her voice nasal and grating. His family is flying down on a private charter. They expect a certain caliber of hospitality. You cannot just ruin my wedding because you are bitter and alone. Mama already said she would cover the interest payments until Brandon's funds clear. You literally just have to sign the debt acknowledgement form so the venue releases the hold. It is not a big deal. Not a big deal. I looked from my sister to my mother. Mama Valerie was still standing near the fireplace, clutching her silver cross necklace. She refused to make eye contact with me, but her posture was rigid with that familiar stubborn pride she always wore when she knew she was wrong, but refused to admit it. You gave him my social security number, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. I am your daughter, and you handed my identity over to a man who threw your granddaughter's birthday cake in the trash. You committed a federal crime against your own flesh and blood just to impress a man who speaks to us like we are the dirt beneath his shoes. Mama Valerie finally lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with defensive anger. She marched toward the center of the living room, her expensive silk skirt swishing around her ankles. Do not you dare use that tone with me in my own house, she snapped. The Lord teaches us that sacrifice is the foundation of family. You have a steady paycheck. You have no husband to support, and no massive obligations. Chloe is marrying into an elite family. Do you have any idea what the women at the church would say if this wedding gets canceled? They would whisper that my daughter was not good enough for a man of Brandon's stature. I will not have my reputation dragged through the mud because you want to be stingy. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest. I gave him the number because it was the only logical solution. Chloe's credit cards were acting up due to fraud protection, and Brandon's assets are tied up in complicated investments. It was a temporary bridge loan. You are going to take that pen sign the assumption of debt and apologize to your brother-in-law for causing this unnecessary stress. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The depth of her self-hatred and her desperate need for white validation was staggering. She was willing to financially ruin her eldest daughter, saddle me with $100,000 of high-interest debt, and risk federal prison, all to secure a front-row seat at a country club that would never actually accept her. How did you bypass the security questions? I asked, keeping my tone deadly flat. The banking institution that manages the Sterling Estates financing has a rigorous multi-step verification process. They ask specific historical questions. How did you get past the fraud department? Mama Valerie crossed her arms, looking entirely too proud of herself. I am your mother, she scoffed. Do you think I do not know the name of your first childhood pet? Do you think I do not remember the street we lived on when you were 5? It took me less than 10 minutes on the phone with the representative to verify your identity. It was incredibly simple. You impersonated me on a recorded financial line, I clarified, making sure she fully understood the gravity of her confession. I did what I had to do to protect this family's future. Mama Valerie fired back, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You should be thanking Brandon for even considering bringing us into his circle. When his new venture launches, the capital returns will trickle down to all of us. He is going to make sure Chloe never has to work a day in her life. Big Mama would have wanted us to use whatever resources we had to secure our place in society. Do not you ever put Big Mama's name in your mouth to justify your crimes? I commanded, my voice suddenly sharp and commanding, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Big Mama was a fiercely proud black woman who scrubbed floors and took in laundry for 3 decades to buy her beautiful historic brick home. She paid off every single cent of that mortgage with her own sweat and blood. She left that house to you with one strict condition. It was meant to be our family's permanent sanctuary. She did not work herself to the bone so you could hand over my financial freedom to a man who cannot even afford his own car payments. Brandon laughed again, a harsh grating sound. He set his empty glass on the counter and walked back over to the coffee table. He picked up the fraudulent contract and shoved it back into my hands. Save the dramatic family history lesson for a daytime talk show, Nia Brandon sneered. The reality is that the loan is already processed under your name. The digital footprint traces straight back to this very house and your mother's phone records. If you go to the police and report this as identity theft, they will not just be looking at me. They will arrest your mother for conspiracy and federal wire fraud. She will be charged as a direct accessory to the crime. He leaned down, bringing his face dangerously close to mine. They will put handcuffs on the beloved president of the church welcoming committee and march her straight to a federal holding cell. Are you really going to send your own mother to a concrete prison cell over a piece of paper? Are you going to be the reason your mother wears an orange jumpsuit instead of her Sunday best? Chloe gasped dramatically from the sofa. You cannot let her do that to Mom, Brandon. Tell her she cannot do that. She will not do that, Brandon stated with absolute sickening confidence. He looked me up and down, evaluating me like a pawn on a chessboard. Because Nia is the responsible sister. She is the one who plays by the rules and carries the burdens. She knows that turning me in means destroying her own mother. He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out an expensive fountain pen, holding it out to me like a peace offering from a tyrant. Sign the formal debt acknowledgement form, Brandon ordered softly. Personally assume responsibility for the venue cost. Apologize to Chloe. If you do exactly as you are told, I will graciously allow you to keep quiet and your mother gets to stay out of a federal penitentiary. It is a very simple choice, Nia. Your credit score or your mother's freedom. I looked at the silver pen in his outstretched hand. I looked at my sister, who was nodding eagerly, fully expecting me to fall on my sword for her fabricated happiness. I looked at my mother, who stood tall and defiant, completely devoid of any maternal guilt, banking entirely on my lifelong habit of protecting this family from its own destructive behavior. They had laid their trap perfectly. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They expected me to cry, to beg, to fold under the immense pressure of protecting my mother from total destruction. They thought they had completely outsmarted the quiet single mother. I slowly reached out and took the expensive fountain pen from Brandon's fingers. I felt the heavy, cool metal against my skin. I looked down at the contract bearing my stolen identity. Then I looked back up at Brandon, and a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I did not uncap the pen. Instead, I calmly snapped the pen in half and let the pieces drop onto the expensive Persian rug. "You really think you hold all the cards?" I said, my voice dropping to a lethal velvet whisper. "You think your fake Massachusetts pedigree and your empty threats frighten me? You think you can walk into a black woman's home, steal her identity, threaten her mother with federal prison, and walk away the victor?" I unclasped the manila folder I had brought with me and let a thick stack of official notarized court documents slide onto the coffee table, landing directly on top of the fraudulent loan agreement. "You forgot one very crucial detail about me, Brandon," I said smoothly. "I do not just work a basic 9-to-5 job. And I am certainly not the helpless victim you so desperately need me to be. You want to talk about high society and financial leverage. Let us talk about public bankruptcy filings. Let us talk about how much you actually owe, and let us talk about who really owns the venue you are trying to steal." The confident smirk on Brandon's face instantly vanished. The air in the room suddenly turned suffocatingly heavy as he stared down at the documents I had just presented. The game was over, and I was about to destroy his entire world. Before I could even process the absolute audacity of his ultimatum, the heavy silence in the living room was shattered by the rustle of expensive silk. Mama Valerie stepped directly between me and Brandon. She did not position herself to protect her daughter from a man making federal threats. Instead, she stood shoulder to shoulder with him, forming a united front against me. She reached up to touch her silver cross necklace, a gesture I knew all too well. It was the same performative motion she used every Sunday at church, right before she delivered a masterclass in emotional manipulation. "Nia, you need to lower your defenses and listen to reason. Mama." Valerie began, her voice dropping into that soothing, overly dramatic tone she used to command the congregation. "The Lord teaches us that sacrifice is the highest form of family love. We are supposed to bear one another's burdens. You are acting as if we asked you to cut off your own right arm. We are simply asking you to be a team player for once in your life." I stared at her, completely motionless. A team player. She was equating federal identity theft with being a team player. Mama Valerie took a step closer to me, her eyes pleading but completely devoid of any actual maternal warmth. "Look at your life, Nia. You are already a single mother. You have your little apartment and your basic public relations job. Your path is already set. You are never going to need $100,000 for a grand wedding, because let's be honest, you are past the age where men are lining up to give you that kind of fairy tale. But Chloe has a real chance here. Brandon is offering her a life we could only dream of." Chloe nodded enthusiastically from the sofa, wiping her tear-stained cheeks. "Exactly," Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I am actually doing something with my life. I am marrying into a family that matters. You owe me this, Nia. You owe it to the family to make sure my day is absolutely flawless." Mama Valerie held up her hands, motioning for Chloe to let her finish. She turned her intense, desperate gaze back to me. "Brandon's family is flying down from Massachusetts on a private charter, Nia. Do you have any idea how important these people are? Do you understand the sheer humiliation we would face if this wedding is canceled because of a minor financial technicality? The women at the church would absolutely tear me apart. Our family name would be a laughingstock. I cannot allow Brandon's wealthy relatives to look down on us and think we are just a bunch of disorganized, broke people who cannot even secure a venue." My mother reached out and gently pushed Brandon's hand, guiding the expensive fountain pen closer to my chest. "Just take the pen," Nia, Mama Valerie pleaded, though it sounded more like a strict command. "Sign the debt acknowledgement paper. Censor your pride for just 1 minute. You do not even have to pay it all right now. You can figure out a payment plan with your salary until Brandon's offshore accounts clear. Just consider it your wedding gift to your younger sister. Be the bigger person. Be the responsible black woman you always claimed to be and save this family from total ruin. I stood completely still, letting the heavy, suffocating weight of her words wash over me. I looked at the three of them standing there in my mother's lavishly decorated living room. My sister who thought the world owed her a crown just for breathing. The arrogant white con artist who felt perfectly comfortable threatening me in my own family's home. And my mother, a woman so deeply infected by a desperate need for high society validation that she was willing to financially enslave her eldest daughter just to keep up appearances. They expected me to break. They expected the crushing guilt of religious obligation and familial duty to force me onto my knees. They thought I would take that pen sign away my financial freedom and swallow my rage just to keep the peace. Because that is what black women are always expected to do. We are expected to be the mules of the family, carrying everyone else's toxic mistakes on our backs while they ride in the carriage. A sound began to rumble deep inside my chest. It started low, a quiet vibration that forced its way up my throat. Before I could stop it, I threw my head back and laughed. It was not a light, nervous laugh. It was a dark, rich, terrifying sound that echoed off the high ceilings and made the crystal chandelier above us seem to vibrate. It was a laugh utterly devoid of humor, dripping with so much raw mockery that it caused the entire room to physically recoil. Brandon lowered the pen, his smug expression faltering into genuine confusion. Chloe pulled her silk robe tighter around her shoulders, shrinking back into the velvet cushions. Mama Valerie took a sharp step backward, her hand flying to her chest in supreme offense. "What on earth is so funny?" Mama Valerie demanded, her voice shrill with sudden panic. I stopped laughing, dropping my gaze to lock eyes with my mother. My face went completely deadpan. "I am laughing at your absolute delusion," I stated, my voice ringing with lethal authority. "You are standing here quoting scripture and begging me to commit financial suicide as a wedding gift. You want me to sign a legal document accepting $100,000 of high-interest debt because you committed identity theft." I took a slow, deliberate step toward Brandon, forcing him to hold his ground. "Let us get the legal facts perfectly straight right now," I said, pointing a sharp finger at his chest. "You used my social security number to secure a massive corporate loan across state lines. That is federal wire fraud. That is aggravated identity theft. That is not a family favor or a minor technicality. That is a crime punishable by up to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. And you have the sheer unfiltered audacity to stand in this living room in a house you do not own and threaten me with my mother's freedom." Brandon puffed out his chest, trying desperately to regain his footing. "I already told you how this works," he spat back, trying to sound intimidating but failing miserably. "The digital footprint traces back to Valerie. If you blow the whistle, your mother goes down with me. You are trapped, Nia. Just sign the paper and stop acting like you are holding any real power here. My family has lawyers on retainer who would crush you before you even made it to a courtroom." I let out another short, sharp laugh. "Your family," I mocked, shaking my head in pure disgust. "Let us talk about your highly esteemed family, Brandon. Let us talk about this vast, untouchable generational wealth you keep throwing in my face." I turned my back on him and walked over to my designer handbag sitting on the entryway table. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out a thick, glossy financial report that my corporate security team had compiled for me hours ago. I walked back to the coffee table and slammed the report down right next to his fraudulent loan agreement. "You told my mother that Chloe's credit card was declined by the venue due to a daily limit restriction," I said, my voice rising in power and volume. "You told this entire room that you only needed my social security number as a temporary bridge loan until your massive offshore trust fund cleared." I grabbed the report and shoved it directly into Brandon's chest, forcing him to take it. I saw the transaction logs from the Sterling Estates merchant processing system, I revealed, watching the blood completely drain from his face. I saw the exact timestamp and the exact card numbers that were swiped through the system yesterday afternoon. The card that bounced hard enough to trigger a fraud alert did not belong to Chloe. Chloe gasped from the couch, her eyes darting frantically between me and her fiancé. What is she talking about? Brandon Chloe demanded. You told me my card flagged because of the catering deposit. I ignored my sister and stepped so close to Brandon I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. The declined card was not Chloe's, I declared, dropping the final devastating truth bomb into the center of the room. It was yours. Your personal platinum card was declined for insufficient funds. You do not have an offshore trust account waiting to clear. You do not have a team of Boston lawyers on retainer. You used my social security number to borrow $100,000 because you could not even afford to pay the initial 20% deposit. You are nothing but a broke, empty-pocketed fraud. The heavy silence in the room was absolute. Brandon stared down at the broken pieces of his expensive fountain pen resting on my mother's Persian rug. His chest rose and fell rapidly. The confident, sneering man who had stood over me just seconds ago was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified fraud realizing his entire house of cards was violently collapsing. I did not give him a single second to recover. I reached down and spread the documents across the glass coffee table like a dealer laying out a winning hand. Your family lost their Boston estate 5 years ago, I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The hedge fund your father managed was liquidated by federal regulators to pay off millions in secured debts. Every dime of that supposed generational wealth you constantly brag about vanished before you even graduated college. You do not have offshore accounts, Brandon. You have a negative bank balance, multiple collection agencies hunting you down, and a credit score so abysmal you could not even secure a basic car loan. Chloe scrambled off the velvet sofa. She pushed past Brandon to look at the documents scattered on the table. Her eyes darted wildly over the highlighted sections of the federal bankruptcy filings. What is this? Chloe demanded, her voice shaking with absolute panic. Brandon, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Tell her your family is transferring the funds for our house in the Hamptons next week. Brandon opened his mouth, but only a pathetic stuttering sound came out. He looked from Chloe to the documents, and then to me. His face was a sickly shade of gray. The pastel polo shirt he wore suddenly looked less like a symbol of wealth, and more like a cheap, desperate costume. He cannot tell you that because it is a lie, I answered for him. That luxury sport utility vehicle parked in the driveway right now is a short-term lease that is exactly 90 days past due. The dealership already issued a repossession order. That prestigious country club membership he claims to hold was revoked last year for non-payment of dues. Everything about him is a fabricated illusion. He is drowning in debt and looking for a massive lifeline. I took a step closer to him, forcing him to back up against the mantelpiece. You came into my family looking for a bailout, I said, my gaze cutting right through his pathetic facade. But why target Chloe? Why target a family in Atlanta when you were playing the part of a Boston elite? I turned my attention to my mother. Mama Valerie had backed away toward the dining room doors, her hands clutching her silk blouse. She looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights. It took me a while to figure out the connection. I continued, keeping my voice dangerously calm. My corporate security team had to dig deep into your social circles, Brandon. But then we found the link. We found out who you have been talking to and what you have been listening to. You heard a very specific, very loud rumor circulating through the community. I took another step toward my mother. You have been running your mouth at the church, have you not, Mother? I asked. You have been sitting in the front pew drinking sweet tea with the welcoming committee and bragging to anyone who would listen about our family's massive trust fund. You painted this grand picture of generational black wealth just to make yourself look important among your peers. You told the entire congregation that Chloe was the heiress to a vast fortune left behind by our grandmother. Mama Valerie gasped, her hand flying to her throat. I did not mean it like that, she stammered defensively. I was just talking about our blessings. We have a rich legacy. I was ensuring Chloe was respected in the right circles. You put a massive target on your own daughter's back, I shouted, finally letting my anger crack like a whip. You broadcasted a fake fortune to a room full of people and word traveled fast. It traveled right to a desperate bankrupt man looking for an easy mark. I pointed sharply at Brandon. He heard the rumors about the Caldwell Family Trust Fund. He saw a shallow, status-obsessed mother and a naive, socially desperate daughter. He realized he could play the part of the wealthy savior, and you would both be too blinded by his supposed pedigree to ever run a background check. He is a gold digger, Mom. A broke, manipulative gold digger who targeted this family to pay off his debts. Brandon finally found his voice. That is defamation, he spat, though his hands were trembling violently. You are taking old financial records completely out of context. My assets are tied up in corporate restructuring. My lawyers will sue you for slander. I laughed right in his face. Sue me with what money, Brandon? You literally just tried to steal $100,000 using my social security number because your own credit card bounced at the venue. You do not even have enough liquidity to buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone hire a legal team. Chloe grabbed Brandon's arm, shaking it frantically. Tell me it is not true, she cried, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. Tell me you have the money for our life together. You promised me we were moving into that luxury condo downtown. You promised me the Sterling Estate wedding. Brandon tried to pull away from her grasp, looking entirely disgusted by her panic. Calm down, Chloe, he hissed, his charming persona completely dropping away to reveal the cold manipulator underneath. You are acting hysterical. I told you we are waiting on a wire transfer. She is just trying to sabotage us because she is a miserable, lonely woman who cannot stand to see you happy. Chloe turned on me, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and pure hatred. She refused to accept reality. Her entire identity was wrapped up in the illusion of this high society marriage. She had spent the last year bragging to her friends, posting staged photos on social media, and acting completely superior to everyone around her. Admitting that Brandon was a fraud meant admitting her entire life was a joke. You are lying! Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You printed these out to ruin my wedding. You have always been jealous of me. Brandon does not need our money. Mom already promised us $500,000 from the family trust fund to start his new venture right after our honeymoon. We do not need anything from your stupid public relations job. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. $500,000 from the family trust fund. The room suddenly felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked out of it. I slowly turned my head away from my screaming sister and locked eyes with my mother. Mama Valerie was frozen by the fireplace. The defensive, proud posture she usually maintained was completely gone. She looked absolutely terrified. What trust fund? I asked, my voice dropping back down to an icy, lethal whisper. My father had passed away when I was 10 years old. He left nothing but a stack of medical bills and a modest life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral expenses. There was no secret family fortune. The only asset of any real value in our entire bloodline was Big Mama's house. Big Mama was my grandmother. She was a fiercely proud black woman who scrubbed floors and took in laundry for 30 years to buy a beautiful historic brick home in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood of Atlanta. She paid off every single cent of that mortgage with her own sweat and blood. When she passed away, she left the house to my mother with one strict, unbending condition. It was never to be sold. It was meant to be our family's permanent sanctuary, a legacy of ownership passed down through generations, so we would always have a roof over our heads. A horrifying realization struck me like a physical blow to the chest. The sudden influx of cash my mother had been flashing around over the last few months. The designer bags she suddenly owned, the expensive catering for the wedding tasting, the ability to casually promise $500,000 to a fraudulent white man for his fake business venture. I took a slow, menacing step toward my mother. Mom, I said, my tone demanding absolute compliance. Look at me right now. Mama Valerie kept her eyes glued to the floor, her breathing shallow and rapid. She was trembling. Do not tell me you took out a mortgage on Big Mama's house. I demanded, the anger boiling up thick and hot in my throat. Tell me you did not leverage our grandmother's legacy to feed this broke con artist. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She lunged forward, physically placing herself between me and her trembling fiancé. Her face was contorted with a mixture of blind panic and pure, unadulterated hatred. She refused to accept the reality laid out on the glass coffee table right in front of her. Her entire identity, her entire sense of superiority over me, was desperately wrapped up in the illusion of this high society marriage. She had spent the last year bragging to her church friends, posting meticulously staged photos on social media, and acting completely superior to everyone in our neighborhood. Admitting that Brandon was a fraud meant admitting her entire life was a pathetic joke. "Shut up!" Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Shut your mouth right now! You printed these fake documents just to ruin my wedding. You have always been insanely jealous of me. You cannot stand the fact that a sophisticated man from a wealthy background chose me over a miserable, lonely single mother like you." I did not flinch. I just stared at my sister, marveling at the sheer depth of her delusion. "Brandon does not need your money," Chloe continued, her voice reaching a frantic, shrill pitch as she gripped his arm for dear life. "He does not need your credit score or your stupid public relations salary. Mom already promised us $500,000 from the family trust fund to start his new venture right after our honeymoon. We do not need anything from you. He is merging his assets with our trust fund. We are going to be untouchable." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating, and incredibly dangerous. $500,000 from the family trust fund. The room suddenly felt as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of it. Brandon's head snapped up. He looked at Chloe, and then his eyes darted rapidly over to my mother. The greedy, expectant look that flashed across his pale face told me everything I needed to know. He was actually counting on that money. He had stayed in this relationship, endured my mother's overbearing church antics, and played the part of the devoted fiancé solely because he believed a massive payday was waiting for him at the altar. I slowly turned my head away from my screaming sister and locked eyes with my mother. Mama Valerie was completely frozen by the fireplace. The defensive, haughty posture she usually maintained for her congregation had entirely evaporated. She looked absolutely terrified. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. She refused to meet my eyes, staring intensely at the floral pattern on the Persian rug instead. Her hands were visibly shaking as she gripped her silver cross necklace, but this time there was no performative grace to the movement. She looked exactly like a cornered animal. "What trust fund?" I asked, my voice dropping to an icy, lethal whisper that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. Mama Valerie swallowed hard, taking a tiny step backward until her shoulder hit the brick of the fireplace. "Nia, this is not the time to discuss private family financial matters," she stammered, her voice lacking any of its usual booming authority. "Chloe is just upset. We are all stressed about the venue." "Do not try to spin this," I snapped, cutting off her pathetic attempt at gaslighting. "What trust fund are you talking about, Mother?" My father had worked at a municipal packaging plant for 30 years. When he passed away from a sudden stroke when I was 10 years old, he left behind nothing but a mountain of hospital bills and a modest life insurance policy that barely covered his burial plot. My mother had to work 2 administrative jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table during our childhood. There was absolutely no secret family fortune. We did not come from old money. We did not have hidden offshore accounts. The only asset of any real tangible value in our entire bloodline was Big Mama's house. Big Mama was my grandmother. She was a fiercely proud black woman who scrubbed floors, took in laundry, and cleaned up after wealthy white families for 3 decades just to buy her beautiful, historic brick home in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood of Atlanta. She paid off every single cent of that 30-year mortgage with her own calloused hands. When she passed away, she left the house to my mother with one strict, unbending condition. It was never to be sold. It was meant to be our family's permanent sanctuary, a legacy of Black ownership passed down through generations, so we would always have a roof over our heads, no matter how hard the world pushed against us. A horrifying realization struck me like a physical blow to the chest. The math suddenly began to click perfectly into place. I thought about the sudden influx of cash my mother had been flashing around over the last 6 months. The brand new designer bags she carried to Sunday service, the incredibly expensive catering she had ordered for the wedding tasting, her brand new luxury vehicle, and most damning of all, her sudden ability to casually promise $500,000 in liquid cash to a fraudulent white man for his fake business venture. I took a slow, menacing step toward my mother. "Mom," I said, my tone demanding absolute, unfiltered compliance. "Look at me right now. Look me in the eyes." Mama Valerie kept her gaze glued to the floor, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. She was trembling so violently that the ice in Brandon's abandoned glass on the counter seemed to rattle. Valerie Brandon suddenly spoke up, his voice losing all its previous smooth charm, replaced by a sharp, demanding panic. "What is she talking about? Where is the trust fund? You showed me the bank statements. You showed me the asset portfolios." He realized he had been played. The professional con artist had been conned by a church-going mother desperate for high society validation. The pure irony of the situation would have been hilarious if the stakes were not so incredibly devastating for my family's legacy. "Shut up, Brandon!" I barked, not even glancing in his direction. I kept my eyes locked on my mother, closing the distance between us until I was standing less than 2 feet away from her. "Do not tell me you took out a mortgage on Big Mama's house," I demanded, the sheer anger boiling up thick and hot in my throat. "Tell me you did not leverage our grandmother's legacy to feed this broke con artist. Tell me you did not put the only piece of generational wealth this family actually owns on the line just to buy a fake aristocrat for your favorite daughter." Mama Valerie finally lifted her head. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup. But even now, caught in the ultimate betrayal, she could not let go of her toxic pride. Her jaw tightened, and she defensively crossed her arms over her chest. "I had to do it!" Mama Valerie cried out, her voice echoing shrilly in the tense room. "You do not understand how the world works, Nia. It is an investment. Brandon's connections in the Northeast are going to double that money once his new business launches. I am trying to elevate this family. I am trying to make sure Chloe never has to struggle the way I did. I am trying to give her the life she deserves." "You gave him the deed to Big Mama's house," I shouted finally, letting my composure shatter completely. My voice roared through the living room, causing Chloe to physically jump back. "I did what any good mother would do to secure her child's future," Mama Valerie yelled back, stepping forward to meet my anger with her own twisted justification. "Big Mama would have wanted us to use that house to secure our place in society. She would have wanted Chloe to marry into a family of influence. I took out an equity line of credit. It is a standard financial maneuver. Once Brandon's trust clears, he is going to pay the house off entirely and build us a new estate. We are going to be untouchable." I stared at her, utterly repulsed by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. She had sacrificed decades of my grandmother's blood, sweat, and tears for a man who could not even afford to rent a tuxedo. "Big Mama would turn over in her grave," I fired back, my words slicing through her pathetic excuses. "She scrubbed floors so we would always have a safe place to sleep. She did not work herself to the bone so you could hand the deed over to a predatory bank just to impress a white man who throws your granddaughter's birthday cake in the trash. You risked our only family legacy for a lie. You sold out your own mother's sacrifice so you could show off at Sunday service." "It is not a lie!" Chloe screamed, stomping her foot on the Persian rug like a massive, overgrown toddler. "Brandon is going to make us millions. You are just trying to ruin my wedding because you will never have one. You are trying to sabotage my happiness because you are miserable." Before I could even formulate a response to Chloe's absolute insanity, a sudden dark chuckle filled the room. Brandon was laughing. The panic had completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sinister, predatory gleam. He slowly walked around the coffee table, stepping directly into my personal space. The fear of being exposed had morphed into the reckless confidence of a rat backed into a corner. He looked down at me, a cruel, mocking smirk twisting his thin lips. "You think you have this all figured out, do you?" Brandon whispered, his tone dripping with thick malice. "You think you can just walk in here with your little folder of public records and play the hero for your family? Let me remind you of one very important legally binding detail, Nia. He reached down and picked up the fraudulent wedding venue contract, tapping the digital signature line with his index finger. This $100,000 loan was successfully approved and processed under your name. The Social Security number verified perfectly. The digital footprint traced straight back to this very house using your mother's IP address. And who exactly handed me all of your highly confidential personal information to make this happen? Brandon turned his gaze toward my mother. Mama Valerie let out a sharp gasp, pressing her hand over her mouth as the reality of her actions finally crashed down on her. That is right, Brandon continued, his eyes locking back onto mine with sick satisfaction. Your dear mother voluntarily provided me with your Social Security number. She helped me bypass the security questions over the phone. She was a fully willing participant in securing this loan. If you try to report me for fraud, I will drag her right down with me. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. If you go to the police and report this as identity theft, the authorities will not just be looking at me. They will arrest your mother for conspiracy and federal wire fraud. She will be charged as a direct accessory to the crime. They will put handcuffs on the beloved president of the church welcoming committee and march her straight to a federal holding cell. Chloe gasped, running over to grab Brandon's arm again. You cannot let her do that to Mom, Brandon. Tell her she cannot do that. She will not. Brandon said, never breaking eye contact with me. He crossed his arms, utterly convinced he had just won the entire war. Because Nia is the responsible sister. She is the one who plays by the rules and protects everyone else. Are you really going to send your own mother to a concrete prison cell over a piece of paper, Nia? Are you going to be the reason your mother wears a jumpsuit instead of her Sunday best? Brandon tossed the contract back onto the table, adjusting his collar with a smug sense of victory. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to sign the formal debt acknowledgement form right now. You are going to personally assume responsibility for the $100,000 venue cost. If you do exactly as you are told, I will graciously allow you to keep quiet, and your mother gets to stay out of a federal penitentiary. Checkmate. He stood there waiting for me to break down. He expected me to cry, to beg, to fold under the immense pressure of protecting my family from total destruction. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet single mother, but he had no idea who he was actually dealing with. Mama Valerie's knees finally buckled under the crushing weight of the truth. She collapsed backward onto the velvet sofa, landing heavily right next to Chloe. Her hands flew up to cover her face, and a loud, jagged sob tore through her chest. Her perfectly styled hair fell out of place, and her shoulders shook violently. She did not need to say a single word. Her total physical breakdown was all the confirmation I needed. The air in the living room turned completely toxic. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a level of disgust so profound it made my vision blur. You actually did it, I said, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with a terrifying calm. You went to a predatory bank and signed away the deed to a historic, fully paid-off property. You took out a massive equity loan on Big Mama's house. Mama Valerie dropped her hands, her face streaked with ruined makeup and tears of absolute panic. She looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes. I did it for us, Nia. I did it to secure our future. Brandon showed me the financial projections for his new commercial venture. He told me that if I provided the seed capital, he would guarantee a 500% return within the first fiscal year. He said we would be able to buy a sprawling estate in Buckhead. He promised me that Chloe would never have to worry about a single bill for the rest of her natural life. You foolish, gullible woman! I shouted, the sheer force of my anger echoing off the high ceiling. You handed over the only piece of generational wealth our bloodline possesses to a white man you met less than a year ago. Big Mama scrubbed floors for 30 years. She took the bus across town in the freezing cold to clean the toilets of wealthy families, just so she could save enough pennies to buy that beautiful red brick house. She bought that property during an era when the banks actively tried to deny Black women the right to own anything. She bled for that deed, Mom. She sacrificed her own health so that her children and her grandchildren would always have a sanctuary. And you traded her blood, sweat, and tears for a fake designer handbag and a fraud of a son-in-law. Chloe jumped up from the sofa, her face red and distorted with fury. She pointed an accusatory finger right at my chest. "Stop bringing up that dusty old house," Chloe screamed. "That place is practically falling apart. The plumbing is ancient and the neighborhood is entirely too loud. Brandon is going to build us a custom mansion. Mom made a smart investment. You are just furious because Mom chose to invest in my future instead of your pathetic, lonely life." I turned my piercing gaze onto my sister, completely ignoring her pointing finger. "He is not building you a mansion, Chloe. He is going to take that $500,000 and use it to pay off his father's liquidated bankruptcy settlements. He is going to drain every single cent out of Big Mama's equity line to keep his own creditors from dragging him into a courtroom. He does not love you. He saw a desperate status-obsessed family, and he saw an open vault." Mama Valerie let out a loud, agonizing wail, rocking back and forth on the sofa cushions. She looked over at Brandon, who was standing frozen near the wet bar. "Brandon, tell her she is lying." Mama Valerie begged, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "Tell her the venture is real. Tell me you did not lie to me about the Boston accounts. I put my name on those bank documents. I put the house on the line. You promised me we were elevating the family name." Brandon did not offer a word of comfort. He did not rush over to console his sobbing fiancée or his panicking future mother-in-law. Instead, he stared at the financial reports scattered across the glass coffee table. He stared at the irrefutable proof of his own financial ruin. The charming, sophisticated mask he had worn for the past year completely melted away, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. He looked at my mother's tear-stained face, and then he looked at me. And then Brandon began to laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a loud, manically cruel laugh that filled the entire room. He threw his head back, the sound vibrating with a deep, sinister amusement. The sudden shift in his demeanor made Chloe physically recoil, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Brandon slowly walked out from behind the wet bar. He rolled up the sleeves of his pastel polo shirt, looking completely unbothered by the fact that his entire con had just been exposed. He strutted over to the coffee table, his eyes locked onto mine with a sickening gleam of dark triumph. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room?" Nia, Brandon said, his voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom. "You think your little corporate background check changes anything that is happening right now? You think you can walk in here, throw some public bankruptcy records on the table, and suddenly play the rescuing hero for these two desperate women?" He lunged forward and snatched the venue financing agreement right off the glass table. He held the document up in the air, shaking the paper aggressively in my direction. "You seem to be forgetting the most important piece of paper in this room," Brandon sneered, his lips curling into a wicked, triumphant smile. "You can expose my family's financial history all you want. You can yell about your grandmother's dusty brick house until you are blue in the face. But the fact remains that a $100,000 loan was successfully approved, processed, and dispersed to the Sterling estate under your name." I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my eyes narrowing as I watched him play his final desperate card. Brandon took a slow, menacing step toward me. He tapped the digital signature line on the contract with his index finger. "You want to talk about the law, Nia? Let us talk about the law. You just threatened to go to the authorities and report this as a stolen identity. You threatened to call the police on me for federal wire fraud. But who exactly facilitated this transaction? Who bypassed the rigorous security questions that the bank required? Who willingly handed over your highly confidential Social Security number?" He shifted his gaze to Mama Valerie, who was now clutching her chest, struggling to catch her breath as the reality of her actions finally crashed down on her. "Your beloved mother," Brandon announced, his voice booming with arrogant authority. "Your church-going, status-obsessed mother is the one who made this happen. She sat on the phone with the banking representative and impersonated you. She is a fully willing co-conspirator in a six-figure federal fraud case." Chloe let out a horrified gasp. "Brandon, stop it!" she cried out, rushing forward and grabbing his arm. "You cannot do this. You cannot threaten my mother." Brandon violently yanked his arm out of Chloe's grasp, shoving her away so hard she stumbled backward into the sofa. "Shut your mouth, Chloe," he barked, not even glancing at her. I am handling the adult business now. He turned his full malicious attention back to me. He leaned in so close I could see the broken blood vessels in the whites of his eyes. If you call the police, Nia, I am not going down alone. I will tell the federal investigators exactly how this went down. I will hand over the phone records. I will show them the IP address that traces the digital signature straight to your mother's personal computer. Who do you think the federal prosecutor is going to make an example out of? A white man from a historically wealthy background who made a simple administrative error during a stressful wedding planning process, or a black woman who actively committed identity theft against her own daughter to secure an unauthorized loan? Mama Valerie let out a choked, terrified sob. She buried her face in her hands, her entire body shaking as the vision of her own destruction played out in her mind. You know exactly how the justice system works in this country. Nia Brandon whispered, his tone dripping with sickening manipulation. They will show her absolutely no mercy. They will put handcuffs on your mother right in front of her precious church congregation. They will march her out of this house and lock her in a federal penitentiary for the next decade. He tossed the loan agreement back onto the table and stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest in absolute victory. So here is the new reality, Brandon dictated, pacing slowly in front of me. You are going to sign the formal debt acknowledgement form. You are going to personally assume full legal responsibility for the $100,000 venue cost. You are going to walk out of this house, keep your mouth completely shut, and let this wedding proceed exactly as planned. You are going to do this because you are the responsible, dependable older sister who always fixes everything. You are going to take on this debt because if you do not, I will personally ensure that your mother spends the rest of her life in a prison cell. He smirked, tilting his head with a look of pure, untouchable arrogance. Do you dare send your own mother to prison, Nia? Do you have the stomach to watch them lock her away? Because that is exactly what will happen if you cross me today. I hold all the cards. You have absolutely no way out. Brandon looked down at the broken pieces of his expensive fountain pens scattered across the Persian rug. For a fraction of a second, genuine irritation flashed across his pale face, but he quickly masked it with another layer of manufactured superiority. He let out a loud, dramatic sigh, as if he were dealing with a stubborn toddler rather than a woman he was actively trying to blackmail into a $100,000 debt. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen, and tossed it callously onto the glass coffee table. It landed right on top of the fraudulent loan agreement with a sharp clatter. "Sign the paper!" Nia Brandon commanded, his voice hardening into a sharp, uncompromising demand. "Stop throwing a childish tantrum. You broke a pen, congratulations, but you are not breaking out of this situation. I have given you the terms. You take the debt, you apologize to my fiancé, and your mother avoids spending the next decade in a federal penitentiary. Pick up the pen." Chloe shifted on the velvet sofa, moving closer to the edge of the seat. She looked at me with an expression of intense, sickening entitlement. She was fully embracing her role as the golden child, completely willing to watch her older sister be financially slaughtered if it meant she could keep her lavish wedding and her fake aristocrat husband. "Nia, just be a decent daughter for once in your miserable life," Chloe pleaded, though her tone was laced with pure venom rather than actual desperation. "Are you really going to stand there and let Mom go to federal prison just because you are too proud to help us out? You are a single mother. You already ruined your own chances at a perfect family. Do not ruin mine. Mom made a mistake to secure my future, and now you have to step up and fix it. That is what older sisters are supposed to do. You have to take the fall for this." I slowly shifted my gaze from my sister to my mother. Mama Valerie had stopped her hysterical sobbing. She was still pressed against the brick fireplace, her hands clutching her chest, but her eyes had changed. The sheer blinding terror of facing federal fraud charges had been momentarily replaced by a sickening glimmer of hope. She was actually looking at me with eager anticipation. She was waiting for me to bow my head, pick up that cheap plastic pen, and sacrifice my entire financial future to cover up her massive, unforgivable crime. Please, Nia, Mama, Valerie whispered, her voice trembling with a disgusting mix of fear and manipulation. The Lord will bless you for your ultimate sacrifice. I only did this because I wanted the best for our family name. If you sign that paper, I swear I will make it up to you. I will go to church every single Sunday and pray for your salvation. You can save my life right now. I stood perfectly still in the center of the living room. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not beg for mercy. I felt the atmosphere in the room shift as I drew myself up to my full height. I looked down at the three of them, these toxic, parasitic people who had spent my entire life treating me like a stepping stone, an afterthought, and a scapegoat. They thought they had finally orchestrated the ultimate trap. They thought they had found the perfect leverage to force me into permanent submission. A slow, profoundly calm smile spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey blindly walk straight into a steel trap. I reached into the pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh, bright light. I did not look at Brandon. I did not look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked on the glowing screen as I deliberately tapped the glass once, twice, 3 times. Brandon scoffed, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. His posture radiated false bravado. "Who exactly are you texting right now?" Nia, Brandon taunted, taking a step toward me. "Are you calling a lawyer? Because good luck finding a decent defense attorney who works for free on a Sunday afternoon. And even if you do, the digital footprint is already set in stone. Your mother's internet protocol address is permanently linked to the fraud. No lawyer can erase that kind of hard evidence. Put the phone away and sign the paper. This is not a negotiation." I calmly locked my phone and placed it face up on the glass coffee table right next to the cheap ballpoint pen and the fraudulent contract. I looked up, meeting Brandon's arrogant gaze with absolute unblinking intensity. "Tell me something, Brandon," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly measured. I tilted my head slightly, studying his pale, sweating face. "Why exactly do you think the Sterling estate sent that cancellation email at 7 o'clock this morning?" Brandon rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated groan of pure frustration. "Because their management team is a bunch of incompetent idiots," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively in the air. "It was a basic system glitch. Their automated software flagged a perfectly legitimate transaction because their back-end servers are outdated trash. The entire hospitality industry is plagued with lazy, uneducated workers who do not understand how high-level financing works." He took a step closer, pointing a threatening finger at my face. "As soon as you sign that debt acknowledgement, I am going to call their corporate office and demand to speak to the highest level executive available. I am going to have their operations director fired by the end of the week for putting my fiancé through this ridiculous amount of stress. My family has deep connections in the Northeast. We know how to ruin a business that disrespects us. I will make sure the owner of that venue issues a public apology to Chloe." I let him finish his entire arrogant rant. I stood there and allowed him to dig his grave as deep as he possibly could. I watched him puff out his chest, completely intoxicated by his own fabricated power, fully believing that his white privilege and his fake Boston pedigree made him the smartest, most untouchable person in the room. "You are going to demand a public apology from the owner," I asked, my smile widening into something truly dangerous. "Absolutely," Brandon declared, completely blind to the trap closing around his neck. "And after you sign that paper, you are going to get on the phone and use your little public relations job to facilitate that apology. You are going to fix this mess, and then you are going to get out of our way." I looked down at my phone resting on the glass table. The screen lit up with a silent notification. The timing was absolutely flawless. I looked back up at Brandon, and the sheer power radiating from my posture forced him to take an involuntary step backward. I picked up my phone from the glass coffee table, my movements deliberate and utterly unbothered. I unlocked the screen and opened the encrypted message that had just illuminated the display. I read the text slowly, letting the silence in the living room stretch until it became absolutely agonizing for the three people standing around me. Brandon shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his pastel polo shirt suddenly looking suffocatingly tight around his neck. "You called the management team at the Sterling estate incompetent," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on my phone. You said they were lazy, uneducated workers who simply did not understand how high-level financing operates. You confidently declared that an automated software glitch was the only possible reason your fraudulent loan application bounced. I locked my phone and slid it right back into my pocket. I looked up and met Brandon's nervous, darting eyes. My management team is exceptionally competent, I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying authority. The financial software we use is state-of-the-art. It did not glitch, Brandon. It operated exactly the way I paid millions of dollars for it to operate. When a six-figure loan application is submitted through our online portal, the system automatically cross-references the Social Security number with our internal corporate database to prevent high-level money laundering and identity theft. I slowly unzipped the inner compartment of my designer bag. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy portfolio bound in premium black leather. When your application hit our servers this morning, the system immediately recognized the Social Security number, I explained, taking a step closer to the coffee table. It recognized the number because it is the exact same Social Security number attached to the primary shareholder profile of the entire holding company. The system did not send an automated error message to a low-level desk clerk. It triggered a Tier 1 security breach and sent a direct high-priority alert straight to the mobile device of the corporation's chief executive officer. Brandon stared at me, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He looked at the black leather portfolio in my hands, a sudden creeping realization beginning to wash over his pale features. I opened the portfolio and pulled out 3 incredibly crisp, heavy sheets of paper. They were stamped with the official raised gold foil seals of the State Commercial Real Estate Commission. I tossed the documents directly onto the coffee table. They landed perfectly on top of his fraudulent loan application. Read them, I commanded. Brandon hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out and picked up the top document. It was the master business license and the certified deed of ownership for the Sterling estate. He read the bold black ink at the top of the page. Then he read the name listed under the primary ownership and executive control division. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. The last remaining drops of blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. "You think I am just some basic public relations employee?" I said, my voice dripping with pure concentrated power. "You think I sit in a cubicle all day and type up press releases for other people's businesses? You stood in my mother's dining room yesterday and mocked my career. You told my daughter that she needed to learn how luxury works from a man who currently has negative $12 in his checking account." I took another step forward, dominating the space, forcing Brandon to shrink back against the sofa. "I do not work in public relations, Brandon. I own a premium commercial real estate and luxury event management corporation. My holding group acquires, renovates, and operates the most exclusive high-end venues across the entire state. And the crown jewel of my portfolio is the Sterling estate. I bought that property 3 years ago. I redesigned the ballrooms. I hired the management staff that you just threatened to fire. I own every single inch of that venue, from the crystal chandeliers down to the manicured grass you plan to walk on." Chloe let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She lunged forward, snatching the documents out of Brandon's shaking hands. She scanned the official state seals and the irrefutable proof of my ownership. Her mouth fell open in absolute shock. "No," Chloe whispered, shaking her head in fierce, stubborn denial. "This is impossible. You cannot own the Sterling estate. That venue costs thousands of dollars an hour just to rent. You live in a normal house. You drive a normal car. You do not have this kind of money. You are lying. You forged these papers just to sabotage my wedding." I let out a harsh, unsympathetic laugh. "You are truly delusional, Chloe. You think I would forge state and federal tax documents just to stop a wedding that was already canceled by my own security team. I live quietly because I prefer peace. I drive a normal car because I do not need to lease a luxury vehicle I cannot afford just to impress strangers at the church. I kept my wealth hidden because I knew exactly what would happen the second this family found out I had money. I knew Mama Valerie would demand I fund your entire fabricated influencer lifestyle." I turned my piercing gaze toward my mother. Mama Valerie was standing frozen by the fireplace. The sheer magnitude of my revelation had completely paralyzed her. She was looking at me as if a total stranger had just walked into her living room and taken off a mask. The daughter she had spent decades belittling, the single mother she constantly used as a cautionary tale to her church friends, was a multimillionaire. I was the very embodiment of the generational wealth she so desperately craved, and she had spent my entire life treating me like absolute garbage. But the shock on Mama Valerie's face quickly morphed into something entirely different. A sickening, twisted glimmer of relief sparked in her eyes. The terrifying threat of federal prison that had been crushing her chest just moments ago suddenly lifted. In her deeply manipulative mind, she had just found her ultimate escape route. "Oh, my lord," Mama Valerie exclaimed, pressing her hands together in a gesture of twisted gratitude. "Nia, you own the venue. You own the whole company." She took a rushed step toward me, a wide, frantic smile breaking across her face. "Do you see how God works in mysterious ways? This is a blessing. This is an absolute miracle. You can just override the system. You are the boss. You can just go into the computer, approve the contract, and waive the fees. You can host your sister's wedding as a gift. We do not have to worry about any identity theft charges because it is your own company. You cannot steal from yourself. We are saved." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a level of disgust so profound it made my skin crawl. She had just confessed to committing federal identity theft, risking my pristine financial standing, to fund a sham wedding for a racist con artist, and her immediate reaction to finding out I owned the company was to demand a free party. She felt zero remorse. She felt zero guilt. She only saw an opportunity to exploit my hard work to save her own skin and protect her precious golden child. I held up my hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Do not take another step toward me," I warned, my voice practically vibrating with rage. "You truly believe I am going to log into my corporate database, override a legitimate fraud alert, and approve a $100,000 event for a man who threw my child's birthday cake in the trash? You think I am going to let this broke, arrogant parasite drink my top-shelf champagne and walk around my property acting like he owns the place?" Brandon suddenly cleared his throat. The raw panic in his eyes was rapidly shifting into a slimy, desperate attempt at negotiation. He straightened his posture, trying to salvage whatever tiny shred of authority he thought he still possessed. "Look, Nia, we got off on the wrong foot," Brandon said, forcing a tight, incredibly fake smile. "Tensions are high. The wedding planning has been stressful for everyone. But your mother is right. Since you own the estate, we can easily sweep this little administrative error under the rug. We can turn this into a mutually beneficial business arrangement. You comp the venue for the weekend, and in exchange, Chloe and I will make sure your estate gets tagged in all the high-profile social media posts. The exposure alone will be worth the cost. We can just tear up this loan agreement right now and pretend this entire misunderstanding never happened." He actually reached his hand out, fully intending to grab the fraudulent loan contract off the coffee table and rip it up to destroy the evidence. "Do not even think about touching that paper," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. Brandon froze, his hand hovering inches above the glass table. "You do not get to negotiate with me, Brandon," I said, taking a slow, predatory step toward him. "You do not get to offer me social media exposure on an estate that is already booked solid for the next 2 years. You do not get to sweep federal identity theft under the rug just because you finally realized you picked a fight with the wrong Black woman." I looked down at the contract bearing my stolen social security number, and then I looked back up at the three of them. "You assumed that because it is my company, I would simply absorb the damage to protect my mother from going to prison," I continued, my eyes locking onto Brandon. "You assumed I would quietly take the hit and let you walk away unpunished. But you clearly did not read the fine print of my corporate structure. I do not own the Sterling estate under my personal name. It is owned by a massive holding corporation with a board of directors, a dedicated legal department, and strict federal compliance regulations." I smiled, and it was the coldest, most ruthless expression I had ever worn. When your fraudulent loan application triggered the security breach this morning, my system did not just notify me. It automatically generated a fraud report and sent it directly to the desk of my chief corporate attorney. Brandon's fake smile completely collapsed. The realization of his impending doom finally set in. "And you are right about one thing, Brandon," I whispered, savoring the absolute terror radiating from his body. "We are definitely not handling this as a private family matter. Because my lawyer is not just sitting at his desk reviewing the paperwork, he is standing right outside that front door." Right on cue, the heavy oak front door swung open. The heavy thud of the wood hitting the wall echoed through the silent house like a judge slamming a gavel. A tall, impeccably dressed black man in a bespoke navy blue suit stepped into the foyer. This was Marcus Thorne, the chief legal counsel for my corporate enterprise. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and an expression of pure, unadulterated professional menace. He did not look like a man who had come to negotiate a family dispute. He looked like a man who had come to execute a financial massacre. Marcus walked directly into the living room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the Persian rug. He stood beside me, surveying the room with a look of absolute clinical detachment. He looked at my mother, shrinking against the fireplace. He looked at my sister, trembling on the sofa. And finally, he looked at Brandon. "You must be Brandon." "Marcus," said his voice deep and smooth, completely devoid of any warmth. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the chief legal officer representing the holding company that owns the Sterling estate. I am also the attorney who just spent the last 2 hours on the phone with the Federal Fraud Division." Brandon dropped the fraudulent loan agreement as if it had suddenly caught fire. The paper fluttered down onto the glass coffee table, landing right next to the certified deed of ownership. His hands were shaking so violently that he had to grip the edge of the sofa just to keep himself standing. "This is a massive misunderstanding," Brandon stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. His Boston accent and his arrogant country club demeanor completely vanished, replaced by the desperate pleading of a trapped criminal. It was just a temporary bridge loan. "Valerie gave me the Social Security number. She authorized the transaction. It is a family matter. We can handle this internally. I will withdraw the application right now." Marcus popped the latches on his leather briefcase. The crisp, metallic click made Chloe physically flinch. "You cannot withdraw an application that has already triggered a Tier 1 federal security breach," Marcus explained calmly, pulling out a fresh stack of legal documents. "When you submitted a loan for $100,000 using a stolen Social Security number across state lines, you committed wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. My client did not even need to press charges manually. The moment your fraudulent application hit our corporate servers, our compliance software automatically generated a report and forwarded it to the authorities. Your personal bank accounts have already been frozen pending a federal investigation." Brandon stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. He fell into the cushions, looking like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. The realization that his entire life was over washed across his face. There was no trust fund coming to save him. There was no wealthy family to bail him out. He was a broke con artist who had just defrauded a multi-million-dollar corporation, and he was going to prison. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. She scrambled away from Brandon, pushing herself into the furthest corner of the sofa as if his sudden poverty and criminal status were a contagious disease. "You lied to me!" Chloe shrieked, her face turning an ugly, blotchy shade of red. "You told me you were rich. You told me we were moving to the Hamptons. You told me you were going to buy me a luxury condo downtown. You are nothing but a broke, lying criminal. You ruined my life. My friends are going to laugh at me. The women at the church are going to humiliate me. You ruined my perfect wedding." Brandon turned his panicked, terrified eyes toward Chloe, and the last shred of his fake charm mutated into vicious cruelty. "Your perfect wedding?" Brandon spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You are a delusional, status-obsessed gold digger. You brought absolutely nothing to the table except a fake designer bag and a mother who could not stop bragging about a trust fund that did not even exist. I only proposed to you because I thought your family had money to bail me out. You were an easy, naive mark." Eve. Chloe burst into loud, hysterical, gasping sobs. burying her face in her hands as her entire fabricated reality shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The golden child, the sister who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was finally facing the bitter, humiliating truth. She was not a high society bride. She was the punchline to a terrible joke. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for her. I turned my attention away from the imploding couple on the sofa and focused my gaze entirely on the woman standing by the fireplace. Mama Valerie was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She was breathing heavily, clutching the fabric of her silk blouse. The reality of the federal fraud report had fully settled into her mind. She knew that her involvement in handing over my social security number made her a direct accessory to Brandon's crimes. "Nia, please," Mama Valerie whispered, her voice cracking. Her proud religious facade was completely gone, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, desperate woman. "You have to call your lawyer off. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You cannot let them arrest me. I am your mother. I carried you in my womb. I raised you. I am the president of the church welcoming committee. If I go to prison, the shame will literally kill me. You have to fix this. You always fix everything." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The air in the room felt electrified. "You are right about one thing, Mom," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying authority. "I always fix everything. I fix the messes you make. I carry the burdens you drop. I am the one who sweeps up the broken pieces after you and Chloe tear through life doing whatever you please. But I am not fixing this for you. I am fixing this for me." Marcus stepped forward and handed me a single heavy folder sealed with a thick red ribbon. I took the folder and held it up so my mother could clearly see the logo of the Regional Banking Authority printed on the front. "When you marched into that predatory bank and took out an equity loan on Big Mama's house, you made the biggest mistake of your entire life," I stated, my eyes locking onto hers with unyielding intensity. "You took the blood, the sweat, and the tears of a hard-working Black woman, and you traded it for a fake aesthetic. You thought you were so smart. You thought you could just borrow against our family's only piece of generational wealth and somehow miraculously pay it back before anyone noticed." Mama Valerie's eyes darted frantically to the red folder in my hands. "I was going to pay it back," she sobbed, her tears ruining her expensive makeup. "The investment was supposed to double. I only missed 3 payments. I was going to catch up. I just needed a little more time." "The bank does not care about your time, Mother," I said sharply. "When you missed that 3rd payment last week, the bank automatically initiated default proceedings. They issued a formal notice of foreclosure. They were preparing to seize this property, kick you out onto the street, and auction off Big Mama's legacy to the highest corporate bidder. You nearly lost the only sanctuary this family has ever owned." Mama Valerie let out a loud, agonizing wail, dropping to her knees right there on the Persian rug. She buried her face in her hands, the sheer magnitude of her failure finally crushing her to the floor. She had risked everything for white validation, and she had lost it all. "But you forgot what I do for a living." I continued standing over her, my presence dominating the room. "My real estate acquisition team monitors every single commercial and residential default in the greater Atlanta area. Years ago, I put a corporate watch on this exact address because I knew deep down in my soul that one day your obsession with status would drive you to make a catastrophic financial mistake." I broke the red ribbon on the folder and pulled out the crisp, legally binding documents inside. "When the default notice hit the banking registry, my acquisition team flagged it immediately," I explained, dropping the documents onto the floor right in front of her kneeling form. "The bank was getting ready to throw you out. But I stepped in. I used my own corporate funds to purchase the bad debt directly from the lending institution. I paid off the entire equity line of credit in full in cash, clearing the lien against the property." Mama Valerie looked up through her tears, her face a mask of total confusion. She reached out with a trembling hand, hovering over the legal papers scattered on the rug. "You paid it off," she whispered, a sickening, delusional spark of hope reigniting in her eyes. "You saved the house. Oh, Nia, thank the Lord, you saved our home. I knew you would not let your own mother end up on the street. I knew you loved this family." I looked down at her, my expression turning into a mask of pure ice. I did not save your home, mother, I corrected her, my voice slicing through her pathetic delusion like a scalpel. I saved Big Mama's home. I pointed a sharp, manicured finger at the primary signature line on the document resting near her knees. When I purchased that defaulted debt, I did not just pay off your loan, I initiated a legal transfer of assets. By satisfying the debt in full and assuming the financial liability that you abandoned, I executed a total acquisition of the property. I own the deed. I hold the title. I leaned down slightly, making sure she heard every single word with absolute horrifying clarity. You do not own this house anymore, Mother. I am the sole legal owner of this property. You are sitting on my rug. You are breathing my air. You are currently standing inside a house that belongs entirely to the daughter you spent 32 years calling a disappointment. Checkmate. The distant, piercing wail of police sirens cut through the suffocating silence of the living room. The sound grew louder with every passing second, echoing down the affluent suburban street, until it was practically vibrating through the walls of Big Mama's house. Red and blue lights began to flash wildly through the large front windows, casting harsh, alternating colors across the faces of my terrified family. Brandon stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the velvet sofa. The arrogant posture, the fake Boston aristocracy, the smug superiority of a man who thought he could easily outsmart a black family, all of it completely vanished. He looked like a trapped rat. He spun around, his frantic eyes darting toward the hallway that led to the back door. He actually took a step toward the kitchen, fully intending to abandon his fiancée and make a run for it. Marcus smoothly stepped directly into Brandon's path. My attorney did not raise his hands or make any sudden movements. He simply stood there, a towering wall of bespoke navy blue suit and unyielding legal authority, blocking the only viable exit. The heavy front door swung open again, and 3 uniformed police officers, accompanied by 2 federal agents in plain clothes, stepped into the foyer. Their radios crackled in the tense quiet of the house. "We are looking for Brandon Hayes," the lead federal agent announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Brandon threw his hands up in the air, his entire body shaking as the officers moved swiftly into the living room. He did not try to maintain his innocence. He did not try to protect the woman he was supposed to marry in less than a month. Instead, the pathetic broke con artist immediately turned on the very people who had worshipped him. "It was not me!" Brandon screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as an officer forcefully grabbed his arms and spun him around to apply the cold steel handcuffs. "I did not steal the identity. She gave it to me. Valerie gave me the social security number. She is the one who called the bank. She impersonated her own daughter. Arrest her. She is the mastermind." Mama Valerie let out a blood-curdling shriek, pressing herself flat against the brick fireplace, as if trying to merge with the wall. Chloe stood frozen in absolute horror, watching the man she had bragged about to her entire social circle completely unravel. "He is lying," Chloe sobbed, reaching out toward him. "Brandon, tell them you are a victim. Tell them about your trust fund." Brandon whipped his head around to glare at my sister as the officers locked the cuffs tightly around his wrists. "Shut your mouth, you stupid, naive little girl." He spat, his face contorted with vicious cruelty. "There is no trust fund. There is no estate in the Hamptons. You and your desperate status-obsessed mother were just an easy payout. You brought absolutely nothing to the table except a fake designer bag and a massive ego. You were supposed to be my meal ticket, but you are just as broke as I am." Chloe collapsed onto the sofa, her hands covering her face as she let out a loud, agonizing wail. Her entire fabricated reality, her perfect wedding, her high society dreams, all of it shattered right in front of her eyes. She was not a wealthy bride. She was the punchline to a devastatingly humiliating joke. The officers read Brandon his Miranda rights, detailing the charges of federal wire fraud, large-scale credit card fraud, and aggravated identity theft. He continued to kick and scream, cursing my name, cursing my mother, and cursing the very house he had tried to steal as they dragged him out the front door. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, leaving a profound, ringing silence in his wake. I turned my attention back to my mother. Mama Valerie was hyperventilating. She looked at Marcus and then she looked at me. She knew that Brandon had just handed the federal agents a full confession of her involvement. She knew that I was the only person standing between her and a prison sentence. The proud, judgmental president of the church welcoming committee slowly slid down the brick of the fireplace. She dropped to her knees right there on the Persian rug. She crawled forward, tears and ruined makeup streaming down her face, and desperately reached out to grab the hem of my tailored pantsuit. "Nia, please!" Mama Valerie begged, her voice hoarse and broken. She was sobbing so hard she could barely form the words. "Please, my beautiful baby girl, I am so sorry. I was blind. I was foolish. I let the devil into this house because I wanted to look important. You cannot let them take me to jail. You cannot throw me out on the street. I gave you life. I am your mother. Please forgive me." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. For 32 years, she had made me feel like an unwanted burden. She had elevated my sister to the status of a queen while treating me like the hired help. She had used my single motherhood as a weapon to humiliate me at every family gathering, and when she needed money to impress a racist, fraudulent white man, she had stolen my identity and literally bet my grandmother's legacy on a lie. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, forcing her hands to slip off my fabric. "I am not going to send you to prison." "Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any maternal warmth. "My legal team has already directed the authorities to focus entirely on Brandon's multi-state fraud ring. You are going to avoid a federal indictment, but not because I forgive you. I am doing it because Big Mama would not want to see her daughter in a jumpsuit. I am sparing you for her sake, not yours." Mama Valerie let out a loud gasp of relief, pressing her hands together in a prayerful gesture. "Oh, thank the Lord. Thank you, Nia. I promise I will make this up to you. We can fix this house up. We can live here together as a real family." "You are not living here," I stated, dropping the final crushing verdict into the center of the room. Mama Valerie froze, her hopeful smile dying instantly on her lips. Chloe looked up from the sofa, her tear-streaked face masking pure confusion. "I bought this house to protect the bloodline," I explained, my tone radiating absolute unyielding authority. "Big Mama bled for these bricks. She sacrificed her entire life so that this family would have a foundation. You took her sacrifice and you handed it to a bank to pay for a wedding tasting. You proved that you cannot be trusted with generational wealth. You proved that you value the perception of high society over the safety of your own flesh and blood." Marcus unclasped his leather briefcase and pulled out a single heavily stamped legal document. He stepped forward and dropped it onto the glass coffee table right next to the canceled wedding contract. "That is an official court-ordered notice of eviction," I said, looking down at my mother and my sister. "I am the sole legal owner of this property. I will be maintaining this home as a sanctuary for my daughter Zuri. She will grow up knowing the value of what her great-grandmother built, and she will never have her joy thrown in a trash can ever again." Mama Valerie stared at the eviction notice, her entire body shaking. "You cannot do this," she whispered, pure terror gripping her throat. "Where will we go? We do not have any money. Chloe's credit is ruined. My reputation will be destroyed. You cannot kick your own mother out of her home." "It is not your home anymore," I replied coldly. "You gambled it away. I simply bought the chips. You and Chloe have exactly 7 days to pack your clothes, gather your things, and vacate my property. If you are not gone by next Sunday morning, Marcus will return with the local sheriff to escort you off the premises." I turned my back on them, adjusting the strap of my designer bag on my shoulder. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt completely, overwhelmingly free. "You have 7 days, Mother," I said over my shoulder as I walked toward the front door. "I suggest you start packing. You are going to need a lot of boxes for all that audacity." Exactly 3 weeks later, the morning sun rose over the perfectly manicured grounds of the Sterling estate. It was the exact date my sister had circled on her calendar for the past year. It was supposed to be the day Chloe married her fake aristocrat and secured her fabricated position in high society. Brandon, of course, was currently sitting in a federal holding facility awaiting trial, denied bail due to his extensive flight risk and a long history of interstate financial crimes. Mama Valerie and Chloe had been forcibly evicted from Big Mama's house the previous Sunday. They were currently crammed into a tiny two-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, their pristine reputation within the church community entirely reduced to ashes. Yet against all logic and reason, Chloe still showed up. I was standing on the expansive marble terrace of my estate, watching my event staff finalize the decorations when a battered yellow taxi pulled up to the towering wrought iron security gates at the end of the driveway. I watched in sheer disbelief as my sister stepped out of the vehicle. She was wearing a cheap, heavily discounted white wedding dress that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a clearance bin. The synthetic lace was wrinkled and the tulle skirt was frayed at the edges. Her makeup was frantically applied, her hair hastily pinned up in a messy imitation of an elegant bridal updo. She marched up to the security intercom completely consumed by an intense, staggering level of delusion. She genuinely believed that if she showed up in a white dress, I would suddenly be overcome by sisterly guilt, open the gates, and allow her to host some pathetic makeshift wedding reception using my multi-million-dollar property. She pressed the intercom button repeatedly, her voice carrying across the sprawling green lawns. She screamed my name, demanding that the security guards let the bride inside immediately. I did not call the police to remove her. I wanted her to see exactly what was happening on the other side of those iron bars. I signaled for my head of security to leave her at the gate, but grant her a completely unobstructed view of the main courtyard. I walked down the grand, sweeping staircase of the terrace, dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored emerald green pantsuit. I moved with the absolute unbothered grace of a woman who owned the very ground she walked on. I stopped just a few yards away from the heavy iron gates, crossing my arms over my chest as I looked at the pathetic, shivering woman standing on the public sidewalk. Chloe gripped the iron bars, her knuckles turning white. "Nia, please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking as genuine, desperate tears began to ruin her cheap mascara. Brandon might be gone, but the invitations were already sent. "My friends are expecting a party. Mom is completely devastated. You have this whole beautiful venue set up. Please, just let me in. Let me have my special day. You owe me this as my sister." I looked at her, tilting my head with a cold, predatory smile. "I am not hosting a wedding today, Chloe," I replied, my voice projecting clearly through the iron gates. "I am hosting a celebration for someone who actually deserves a $100,000 budget." Right on cue, a fleet of luxury black sport utility vehicles pulled through the private rear entrance of the estate. The doors opened, and a flood of 10-year-old children came rushing out onto the pristine lawns, their faces lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. At the front of the pack was my beautiful daughter Zuri. She was wearing a custom-designed sparkling midnight blue dress that mirrored the night sky, and a silver tiara rested perfectly on her natural curls. Chloe gasped, her eyes widening as she finally took in the decorations surrounding the grand courtyard. There were no white doves or bridal arches. The entire estate had been transformed into an immersive, breathtaking astronomical wonderland. Tens of thousands of silver, deep purple, and metallic blue balloons formed massive galaxies across the stone pillars. State-of-the-art laser lights projected rotating planets and shooting stars across the pristine white facade of the mansion. I hired the exact same Michelin star catering team that Chloe had bragged about booking for her reception. But instead of serving dry, overpriced caviar to a bunch of pretentious snobs, the world-class private chefs were currently grilling gourmet Wagyu beef sliders, tossing fresh truffle fries, and operating a massive liquid nitrogen ice cream bar for a horde of screaming, delighted 10-year-olds. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat as a team of 6 professional servers carefully wheeled out the centerpiece of the entire event. It was a staggering 5-tier custom birthday cake. It was a flawless, jaw-dropping masterpiece covered in hand-painted edible galaxies, spinning sugar asteroids and glittering stardust. It cost 10 times more than the cake Brandon had callously thrown into my mother's trash can. "You spent my wedding budget on a child's birthday party," Chloe choked out. Her knees trembling so violently, she had to lean heavily against the iron gate just to stay standing. "You gave my luxury catering to a bunch of kids." I stepped right up to the wrought iron bars standing mere inches away from her tear-streaked, desperate face. "You told my daughter that she was not worth wasting expensive calories on." I whispered, my voice dripping with lethal, unforgiving authority. "You sat in our grandmother's house and told a fatherless child that she needed to learn her place. You thought you were untouchable because you had a white man with a fake bank account standing beside you. Now look at you, Chloe. Look at where your vicious entitlement got you. You are standing on a public sidewalk in a cheap, wrinkled dress, begging for scraps from the very woman you spent your entire life trying to destroy." Zuri's joyous laughter echoed across the courtyard as her friends gathered around the massive 5-tier cake. The live band I had hired specifically for the occasion began to play a vibrant, upbeat rendition of the happy birthday song. "You are going to stand out there on the other side of my security fence, and you are going to watch my daughter get the world handed to her on a silver platter," I said, delivering the final crushing blow. "You are going to watch her blow out her candles, and you are going to realize that your fake high society life is officially over." I turned my back on my sister without a single ounce of hesitation. I walked away from the gates, leaving Chloe sobbing hysterically, her hands desperately gripping the cold iron bars, as she watched the greatest celebration of my daughter's life unfold without her. Later that evening, long after the final firework illuminated the sky above the Sterling estate, and the last of the catering trucks had packed away their equipment, a profound and absolute quiet settled over the entire property. I walked upstairs to the master suite and peeked through the slightly cracked door. Zuri was fast asleep in the center of a massive canopy bed, clutching the giant stuffed bear I had won for her at the arcade. A peaceful, untroubled smile rested on her face. Her joy was fully restored, completely untouched by the toxic adults who had tried to steal it from her. I softly pulled the heavy wooden door shut and walked out onto the private marble balcony overlooking the sprawling manicured grounds of my venue. I poured myself a generous glass of a deep vintage red wine. I took a seat in a plush leather armchair, letting the cool night air wash over me. I crossed my legs, rested the crystal glass on my knee, and looked directly forward. For 32 years, they called me the family disappointment. They looked at a single mother and saw nothing but a convenient scapegoat, a financial stepping stone to be trampled on whenever they needed to elevate their own fragile egos. They genuinely believed that my quiet nature was a sign of weakness. But they forgot one crucial, undeniable fact. When you back a determined black woman into a corner, she does not surrender. She learns exactly how to build an impenetrable empire. I took the very identity they tried to weaponize against me and used it to secure my absolute freedom. Big Mama's house is completely safe. The deed is locked away in my corporate vault permanently, out of the hands of the women who were willing to trade her decades of blood, sweat, and tears for a fleeting, fabricated moment of white validation. The toxic elements that poisoned my life for decades have been officially and permanently excised. The fake aristocrat is trading his pastel country club attire for a federal prison jumpsuit, and my mother and sister are finally learning what the real struggle years actually look like far away from my sanctuary. Society will constantly try to tell you that blood is thicker than water. Toxic relatives will use the word family, like a heavy rusted chain, to keep you tied to your own abuse. They will manipulate scripture leverage, generational guilt, and demand your complete submission just to keep their superficial image intact. But I learned the absolute liberating truth. Family is not defined by shared genetics or a common last name. Family is not the people who smile for the church photographer while actively plotting your financial ruin behind closed doors. Family is not the people who demand your total sacrifice to fund their delusions. Family is defined by the people who celebrate your victories. It is the people who fiercely protect your peace. And above all else, family is the people who would never under any circumstances throw your daughter's birthday cake into the trash. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my wine, letting a calm, victorious smile spread across my face. I finally had my peace, and nobody was ever going to take it from me again.